Alright, what is up everybody? Welcome back to another video. This is a remake. The last one had a very blurry image, so I'm just gonna re-record and upload it. But we're gonna make some weapon tracing, see what we have here. Only fitting since in the last videos we made the attack animation, so we need a way to actually detect if we hit our enemies and so on. So let's just jump straight into it. I'm gonna pause and remove everything I set up so we can set it up again step by step. So 1 second. Alright, I think that is everything removed. So let's get into it. Let's see. Yes, there's no tracing going on right now. So let's get into it. So basically, we are gonna trace during the animation from certain points of the weapon. So in order to do that, we first need to add some sockets. So I'm gonna add 2 sockets to the static mesh, called one top socket, called one actually top trace, and called one bottom trace. And I'm gonna move the top one up here and the bottom one somewhere around there. So basically the first trace will be between these 2 points, and then we're gonna save the location of where these were the previous frames and also trace from those. So it's gonna be like a box trace every frame so that we don't miss any parts of the swing. And this also works well because if you have like a weapon that has a smaller hitbox or something, you just reduce these. If you have a spear, maybe you only want a tip to do the damage, or a halberd or something. But we're gonna do this for now. And that's the first part. Then we need to detect a part of the animation where we actually want to do the trace. So in order to do that, we need to make a new animation state. And we made this disable input states before, which keeps us from being able to spam the attack button. So you can just duplicate this or right click and blueprint class anim notify state. Anim notify state. That's the one we're using. I see I didn't delete mine, so I have mine here. And if you made a new one, you need to overwrite the on notify begin and on notify end here. I already have mine. So when this notify begins, we need to do something, and when it ends, we need to do something. So what we want to do is we want to grab our combat components. So we get the owner, which will be the pawn in this case, because the pawn is playing the animation. Find component by tag, and now we need to tell the combat component to start the trace. So we do that by finding the component by tag, so we don't unnecessarily load in the class or anything. And you probably guessed it, but we also need an interface to be able to set this variable. And we already have a bunch of interfaces. In this case, we're gonna use our combat component interface. We're gonna add a new interface call. I'm gonna call it toggle weapon trace. It's gonna have an input of a bool that is just weapon trace on. And now we can add this interface to our animation state. So on the begin, call toggle weapon trace on, and on the end, call toggle weapon trace off. So now this will toggle the function whenever this state is active. So just to show you, I already added this obviously to my weapon attacks. You can see I have the state here. So you just right click, anim notify state, and state weapon trace. And then you can do it for however long you want to. I'm gonna do it during the peak of the swing. So the trace will start here and stop here. And the same goes for the rest of the animations. Start here, stop here. So you just take your time and add that to all of your animations. And then we actually need to add the toggle function. So we just do event call toggle weapon trace. So this is the function that gets called from the animation state. Now we need a way to actually detect it in the blueprints as well. So we're just going to promote this to a variable called weapon trace on. Be weapon trace. I'm gonna try to keep to Epic's own standards. And now we need to actually do the trace because this will be on. So if I just print string this now, you can see it's printing true during some of the frames. And the reason it's not printing all the time is because we're disabling and enabling tick only during the animations. So yeah, that seems to work. So now we actually need to do a trace. So I'm gonna create a new function called perform weapon trace. See, I have my old function here. So let's set this function up. We already have our current weapon actor from previously. So we should only do this if current weapon trace is valid. We should also only do this if weapon trace is on. And as I said, we're going to trace between these sockets. So we also need a way to retrieve the actual static mesh. Because as I said, this is just an actor reference because we don't want the actual class here because that would make the component rely on that class. So we don't want a specific object reference. We only want the base class of actor. So that means that I can't get the mesh from here straight away. I need an interface call. So we can go to our weapon actor and do another function called get weapon mesh. Apparently didn't work. Get mesh. I wonder why that didn't work. Okay. It probably has saved from before, so it doesn't want to call it that. So get mesh or get weapon mesh or get equipment mesh or whatever. It's gonna output a static mesh component. Make sure that you're not doing static mesh object. You see, not this one. We need the component, static mesh component object reference. I'm gonna call the output weapon mesh. So if we now open our master weapon, we have the function here. And we have the equipment mesh here. So we can just drag it in here. And that's gonna return the equipment mesh. This is actually called equipment mesh, so I'm gonna do like this. Get equipment mesh. So now we have a way to actually retrieve a reference to the equipment mesh. So we call that function here. Get equipment mesh. Perfect. Now we need to find the sockets. So we need to know about these two sockets, right? So get socket location and get socket location. And this has to have the exact same name with capital letters. So top trace, bottom trace. Top trace, bottom trace. I'm gonna promote these to local variables. So current top trace and local variable current bottom trace. And then we need to actually trace. So and you could do for objects here. It depends on what you actually your specific game. You could box trace for objects and do only pawns or whatever. I'm gonna box trace by channel. I think box trace by pawn will only register, or box trace by object will only actually hit the objects. So it's probably a little bit more performance, but by channel we can do this. We can set up specific collision channels and everything if in case we want to detect environment hits and stuff like that as well. So let's see how it looks if we just plug in what we have now. I'm gonna do like 10, 10, 10. That didn't wanna do anything for duration. Because we actually need to plug in the function as well. So perform weapon trace. Here we go. See, it's not bad. It almost works just like this. And this is actually like probably fine in most cases. So you can probably stop here if you want to. You have to decide for your own game. But there is potentially an issue with this. The issue with this is that we're not actually tracing from the previous frames to the new frames, which means, I'm not sure if you can see it in the video, but there are some gaps between these traces. And the size of these gaps will in this case be determined by your frame rate. So if you're running on lower frame rates, these gaps will be larger, which means that there's an increased chance of not detecting the enemies when you're actually hit. But as long as the game is running smoothly, this will probably be fine. Because you see, it's covering most of the distance. But let's improve it. So in order to improve it, we also need to trace from our previous locations to the new locations. So I'm gonna promote these to normal variables, not local variables this time, just to create new ones. So this will be previous top socket. And promote to a normal variable, previous bottom socket. So after this trace has been run, we're gonna set the previous one to the current one, and the same here. Now I need to remember how I actually did this. I'll look at how I did. Just gonna copy this so that I remember. Okay. So we're gonna take our current top socket and current bottom socket. And we're gonna get the distance. So this is the distance between these two, right? And that should be our half size x, exactly. So we divide this by 2 because that's half size. So that means we are now tracing a box trace between them. The start location should be the previous top socket. So it's going to be what it was on the last frame. And the end location is going to be the current one. Like so. So that means we are tracing from the previous one, that's somewhere around here, to this one with a size of down here. So that should cover most of it. No matter, so even if you're running on lower frame rates, it's just gonna trace from the previous location wherever it was saved. Anyway, so let's see how that looks. And you can see it's looking pretty good. See, we're not missing anything here now. You're covering like the entire length of the animation. But we also need an orientation because you can see that it's only working in certain angles. So it's working fine in this angle, but it's working less fine in this angle. So I'm gonna copy that. So in order to do that, we need to take our current top trace and our current bottom trace, and we do a find look at rotation, and we'll plug that into the orientation of the trace. And you can see it's looking way better now. Covering pretty much everything without any gaps, and that should be the case even on lower frame rates. Sweet, looking good. There's one more thing we need to set up though, because you can see the initial trace here now, the first one. See, that goes from 0, and if I now run away here, it's gonna go from the saved location of the previous one over there. So whenever we start the trace, we also need to set these previous variables. So we're gonna copy this. And whenever we toggle the weapon trace on, only if we toggle it on. We're gonna get the current weapon. We're gonna set the previous values when the trace starts, just so we don't, otherwise these will be saved from the position wherever we attacked last. So this sets them to the current location of the weapon. So even if I run away over here, the trace starts here, and now if I run away here, the trace starts here. And that is pretty much it. Very smooth and accurate tracing. Whoops. Should be better than 90% of the tutorials that are out there, at least. For now, this is only running on the client as well. Likely. Actually, it's probably not. We'll decide how we do that. This can probably be client authoritative in most games, because I assume you're not making a MMO or super competitive game, because that's not a good idea as a solo developer. So we probably should only run this trace on the client. That makes it so it's easier for us to client predict hits and stuff like that, and then send stuff over to the server. But let's not care about that now. In the next video, we will probably use this trace to actually apply damage and stuff to other things. We don't have anything to apply damage to yet, though, so we'll probably need to add that first. Anyway, that's gonna be it for this video. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and hopefully the quality is better now, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!